your podcast host, learning leader, researcher, speaker coach, and consultant, and author of the book, Dream Big and Live Your Dreams Boldly. As you know, I'm also the CEO and founder of EMK Learning Solutions LLC. And it's so refreshing to be back again this week for yet another empowering episode with our special guest. But before I introduce this guest, and I know you were dying to know who the guest is, but I want to always start with gratitude. I want to take the time to say thank you so much for being a fan of this podcast. There's so many podcasts you could have been listening to, but being able to dedicate your time to listen makes a whole lot to me and other fans. So thank you so much for keeping us going, and I really appreciate you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, this week's episode of the podcast is focused on leadership. And before we get into it, first permit me to introduce our special guest, Mathew. So Mathew, you're just you're here for the first time. This is your very first time you're being a guest on the show, and you're always welcome back. But just get us started by telling us about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am also so appreciative to be on the podcast. I talk a lot about humility, and we'll get into that in a minute, but there's a tremendous amount of research that suggests gratitude and humility are connected. The more grateful you are, the more humble you tend to be. So I love that you started out with that gratitude moment, and I'm very grateful to be here. My name is Matt Sowcik. I am a professor at the University of Florida. I teach leadership on the undergraduate level, and that's usually like intro to leadership classes. We talk a little bit about theory, we talk a little bit about practice, and then I teach it on the PhD level. So I have advisees who go through, learn a little bit about leadership. Mostly my focus is on organizational leadership, and my passion is really around that idea of humility, how humility impacts organizations.
Wow, that's amazing. It's a topic that it's really important to me, and I believe that by the end of this podcast, people would probably have taken so many notes because this is a golden nugget we're going to be sharing here today. So being a professor in leadership, wow, those people that get the opportunity to hear from you getting started in college, the journey is really starting on the right foot because they're like, okay, having the foundation that they need to hopefully become the leaders that we're hoping would make a difference in this world. But now I'm curious, how did you get into leadership? Do you mind sharing your leadership journey? Did you get into it by accident, or is something that you've always wanted to do?
No, I would love to share that. And I really find your comments to be so kind of insightful. I think we need to start the practice of emotional intelligence and leadership and certainly humility even before we get into college. We're going to get into really complex problems over the next century where we're going from 7.6 billion people on the planet to 9.6 billion people on the planet. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to happen. But there's just more complexity with social media. There's more complexity with the way that we're raising our children. If you just look out at the world today, the problems we face are so much more complex. And I think we need to start earlier developing leadership. And that's kind of what I did. You asked me about my backgrounds. It was a really kind of intentional and purposeful movement towards something that I was really, really passionate about. I love this idea of human behavior. And when I grew up, my father was a clinical psychologist, and I just loved what he did. I loved helping people. I certainly loved the idea of watching and engaging with people so that we could, make people great. If we could do that, I felt like we could elevate consciousness. I felt like we could engage people at a level where they were more happy, having more fun. So in college, I really thought I was going to be a clinical psychologist. I did an internship. I went to a group home, and I was only at the group home for about 15 minutes when I got hit in the back of the head with a fire extinguisher from one of the clients that were there. And I was 100% sure 16 minutes in that I was not going to do clinical psychology. So I had to find something that I was passionate about, something that had to do with human behavior, and some way I could really make an impact on the world. I wanted to do something that I was passionate about. So one of my professors suggested this idea of industrial organizational psychology, which turned into, for me, the study of leadership. So when I was in my undergraduate, I did some research on leadership, published some papers. I then went off to Columbia University in New York City, loved my time in New York City, got a master's in organizational leadership. And then I was blessed to be able to find the program out at Gonzaga University, where they grant PhDs in leadership studies. And back in that time, there wasn't a ton of jobs, but I felt like if I could learn as much as I could about a topic area, someone would hire me. And I was fortunate enough to get a job after I got my PhD at a small school, Wilkes University up in Pennsylvania. And then about 6 years ago, got recruited to come down and to teach at the University of Florida, where I am blessed to work with amazing faculty who do the same thing that I do and really put a lot of attention into this field of humility in leadership, and trying to help people really understand the impact that humility can have on leadership.
That's amazing that you get the opportunity to do that. We've shared like some keywords here: gratitude, humility, emotional intelligence. They're all like tied together, and being able to impact young people at that stage of their lives. I actually also teach communication and public speaking at George Mason University. So I always have that that intention every time in front of my students to share something about leadership. So, they all go together. You want to, as a leader, you want to communicate better, you want to speak better. And so all of these things, they definitely add value, whatever way we're intending to reach out to the audience that we're speaking to. So this is really great. But we're going to talk a little bit more about humility, because I know it's something that it's really special. Why? Because many people that I've had the opportunity to chat with, they feel like leadership and humility don't go together, which kind of like makes me laugh. But let me talk first about some of the qualities of a leader that I always look out for. Right? I always like to I'm always attracted to someone who leads from the heart. Right? That quality is something I'm really drawn into in terms of also leading with compassion and kindness. Those who are leadership that is authentic, and leaders who are not really afraid to lead from behind and putting their people forward. So even though these are qualities that I'm really, really, really excited about, I really want to learn even more, from your perspective about humility and leadership, because I didn't even think they would go together. As in terms of someone who's a researcher as well, I'm curious to see, and I'm sure our listeners are curious to hear as well, why humility in leadership? Do they even go together? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. I think when we look at leadership and the hotbed of leadership theory, leadership books, all the books that are being published, a lot of the leadership that comes out from a Western perspective, an American perspective, in
Right.
fact. So it doesn't surprise me much that we, to this point, have not really valued humility as much as maybe we should. And I'll make an argument why we should in just a second. But I think, our individualistic nature, we are individuals who can go out and get our own American dream. That kind of suggests that humility doesn't have a place for that, with that kind of
Right.
stepping back. And there's that. There's certainly this idea of how we evaluate our leaders. And if you look in most fields, people have about 3-4 years to get it right, or they're gone, whether it's in the sports world or if it's CEOs.
That's so true.
So they have to make whatever short-term decisions for themselves to make sure. Even politicians, you get 2 years, 3 years at most to show that you're going to get reelected. So you have to do whatever you can to take care of yourself. So humility kind of plays that backstage role in leadership, and hasn't been published in a lot of leadership books. But I will tell you this. If you really look deep, and I have looked deep on this topic of humility, it's been something I've been so passionate about for the last 10 years. I've done research on it. What I find is this, and there's certainly a lot of reasons, and the reasons I would suggest that we really need to look at humility are a couple. One is that great companies, really great companies like Google and Zappos, have recently, over the last decade, started to transform their culture to
Mhm.
emphasize the important mindset of humility. So someone like Google is a great example. There's a movie out there called The Internship, where Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson are going to get an internship at Google, and they ask a question like, if you were shrunk to the size of a nickel, and put in a blender, how would you get out, and stuff like that. And that used to be the way back in the 90s that Google asked questions to find out. It's 10 times harder to get into Google than it is Harvard University. So they get really smart people. They get these amazingly smart people. And how they decided in the 90s, they asked these ridiculous questions like, how much does the Empire State Building weigh? Or, how many manhole covers are in Chicago? Those were questions that they found after doing a decade's worth of research had no correlation between how successful Google was in getting high performers. So early 2000, this wonderful HR, Laszlo Block is his name, he decided that what they needed to do was focus on humility, because if we could get the smartest people to work at Google, no one person was going to be smarter than people working together. So we need he suggested that they needed to find people who had this collective humility. He talked about intellectual humility and said, if we could find people who knew that they had to work with others to become smarter, we could really elevate. So over the last decade, they did that. Zappos and companies like Worldwide Technology, J. Gallo Wineries, Kellogg Company, Teaching for America, Tinder, just a number of different companies have started to embrace values that are based on humility, actually put it into their corporate values, and it has made a world of difference. If you think about world religions, there's no other common characteristic that all world religions embrace like humility. And when we talk about thought leaders, like really great thought leaders in leadership, people like Warren Bennis and Daniel Goleman, Stephen Covey, Simon Sinek, Adam Grant, John Maxwell, Dale Carnegie, Zig Ziglar, Gladwell, Daniel Pink, every single one of them have agreed or at some point wrote the importance of humility in the stuff that they're talking about. And we find it in all great leaders. If we just look back, people like George Washington and Benjamin Franklin and Madison and, Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, all of these folks. So it got me thinking as I saw all of this over and over, what other trait out there is endorsed by Google and Moses and Dale Carnegie and Ben Franklin? There's no other trait that is embraced as much as humility. It's just we haven't, because of our culture, really gone in and learned about it and learned how to develop it.
That is really powerful. And I am very much a John Maxwell team member, and I can tell you 100% that that represents John Maxwell's brand in terms of humility. He's a very humble leader, and he believes, you can see that even in his books and even Zig Ziglar as well. It's something that I think, it has a lot of potential, and I'm glad to hear that you've done some research in it for over 10 years. So it's really something that I look forward to even hearing more or having more conversations about this topic with you, if you don't mind. So since you are the experts, so to speak, then what are some strategies that you think leaders can use to reach their full potential, even personally, professionally, and even socially when it comes to humility and leadership?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Maxwell. The thing I love most about Maxwell is his focus is always on growth. And I think we share that in similarity, is that as humans, as leaders in leadership development, the focus shouldn't be on profit. It should certainly always kind of be on growth. How are we getting better? How are we elevating in that process? And your engagement with research is so right. It's this idea of all that stuff is nice, but if research doesn't suggest that there is a positive outcome of humility, then there's no reason to practice it. Absolutely. But the truth is, research has shown that there's a positive impact on pro-social characteristics, different characteristics, so that the connection between humility and these characteristics are absolutely present. And it's characteristics like perception, accurate perception, diversity. So the more humble you are, the more you're likely to bring on a diverse team, the research suggests. You're more likely to be creative. a higher level of emotional intelligence, you're more likely to be engaged in the work you're doing. Forgiveness is connected to the research. Generosity is connected. Intuition, certainly stuff like teamwork and well-being and systems thinking. But probably the most important finding, the one that I talk about most, is there has been so much research that suggests the more humble individually you are and the more humble collectively your team and your culture is, the higher levels of performance focus you have and the higher levels of actual performance you have. So that's really important. Research suggests it. It's all outlined in that book that I'm talking about. But you asked me a really important question, which was this idea of humility. How do we get to that potential? What are some tidbits with this? And I will tell you this. I think the way that we define humility becomes really important. I think often when people see humility or hear humility, they think, oh, it means being less than or taking a step back.
Yeah. Many people think it's a weakness sometimes.
Yeah, a weakness. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You're 100% right. And the truth is, the way that I've defined it, and I think the better definition is, it tends to be a proper perspective of how we see ourselves. So really having a proper perspective of ourselves, all the things that we're good at, but all of our weaknesses and being able to manage that. It's a proper perspective of others. So how others are important to us and how we're important to others. And then it's finally a proper perspective of how we connect to something bigger. And that something bigger is so important. And it actually goes in that kind of direction. We certainly have to understand ourselves first before we can understand the importance of others. Then we need to understand the importance of others before we can understand the importance of our bigger calling, our bigger purpose, or what we're connected to. And that may be something with faith or the environment or a cause, but we have to have that as leaders. And what humility does is it suggests that we are imperfect, incomplete, and impermanent. And I think the problem with our leadership development now, and a lot of leadership coaches they say things like, I used to be imperfect, but now I've learned all the secrets and I'm a perfect leader. So if you take my course or my training or my workshop, you can be perfect too. And the truth is, you will never be perfect. You'll never be perfect. You'll never be complete until the day you die. You'll never be complete, and you'll always be impermanent in this world. And I think if we lead from those places, we start to understand that our strengths are tremendously important because they're unique to us. But our weaknesses are also important because then we can go to that next step where we find others who support us, engage us, connect with us to eventually get to the overall purpose. And a lot of the book talks to you just about how you reflect and how you take action to develop yourself with humility. How do you develop your relationship with others so that you're engaged? I always find it funny, that Undercover Boss show, where the leader gets all dressed up and they go in and then, there's that's the others piece of it. They go in and they're so surprised that these other people are so important, and then they give them all this stuff and they do all this stuff with them. Like, that's the humility that happens to them when they go in and understand that other people, no matter if they're the CEO or they've got millions of dollars, like these other people who are engaged in the organization, connected to something bigger, are really, truly important. And we have to take care of them. We have to engage them. Because if you do that, they'll give you blood, sweat, and tears. They'll be able to engage you in your purpose. Leaders are not an end in themselves. They're only that kind of means to helping the organization reach its end or other people reach their end. So having that connection with others, and then that final purpose of what we're looking at and how are we connected to something bigger becomes really important. So every step in this book, I really talk about what are the things we need to do to reflect, to take action. It's amazing. It's almost 300 pages. It's chock full of all of these ways that we can start to develop ourselves a more proper perspective. I never talked about an accurate perception because I don't think we ever get to 100% accurate perception.
No,
but I do think
work in progress.
We grow with that. And the final piece I'd say is this: is that, oftentimes, humility is seen as the opposite of narcissism. It's seen as the opposite of arrogance. And I would argue that it's not the opposite of those. The opposite of something like arrogance or overconfidence is really lacking confidence, is really not having any confidence at all. I think humility is that sweet spot in the middle. It's the as Aristotle might call it, the golden mean, the
Right.
great place in the middle, that we're not overconfident, but we're not underconfident. We just know how confident we are. We have a proper perspective. And it works with creativity too.
Yeah.
And so many other characteristics. If you're at the extreme of creativity, you have no creativity, or you're, eccentric. But if you have humility in your creativity, you understand I have to be creative, but also engage with other people towards that purpose. So humility helps us get to that sweet spot in the middle.
Those are really golden nuggets that you've dropped on the show. And I also want to add that when it comes to humility, it reminds me a lot about vulnerability, right? Because it takes, you have to be, it takes, I would say it takes courage actually to be humble, to be humble. And I also feel that, it's a strength actually, because many people would want to practice humility, and then they don't really have it come to them naturally, that it's a muscle that they have to develop. So I definitely see how it can really shape our purpose, and it can also impact our significance, right? What do we want to be remembered for? So when we're having that mindset, as a leader, using a humble approach, modeling to the people that we're leading that we are not perfect ourselves. We're all growing together. And how can I help you hold your hand so we can get in this journey? I think is really powerful. And I'm thinking also that, our future leaders, this is something that if they really focus on, is going to make the world a better place and break down some of those barriers that we have.
It's amazing. I love your point here. They call it collective humility, and it talks about the culture within an organization or the culture of a people. And there's this phenomena out there called social contagion, theory in the process, and it suggests that if you surround yourself around happy people, you're more likely to be happy. And if you surround yourself with people who are overweight, you're more likely to be overweight. If you surround yourself around smokers, it's social contagion. It's this idea that the people we surround ourselves make a really impact. And in my class, I always say, hello, how was your day at the beginning of class, because I want to make people happy, because then they'll make other people happy. Mm-hmm. And there's this amazing research done by this two gentlemen, Owens and Heckman, who talk about this collective humility, that it has the same impact, that if you are humble, people around you are more likely to be humble. And if your team is more humble, then your organization is more likely to be humble. So if you can train people, if you can engage people to be and come with this collective humility, you're more likely to have a focus on performance, more likely to have actual increased performance. You're more likely to be engaged with others and be less competitive. So when we talk about why organizations silo, it's because they lack humility in that process. They're more likely to work together. So all of those benefits we get from humility can actually come out of this social contagion, where one person can influence another person. We always ask leaders, think about it this way: how is your boss impacting your spouse? Because your spouse is impacted socially by that. If they're more happy, then you're more happy, then your wife is more happy in that process. So the people we surround ourselves around, the energy we give, especially when it's associated with humility, is contagious. It's contagious. And instead of dealing with the pandemic and the contagion that is negative, let's start this pandemic of humility, this virus of humility that goes across organizations, that goes across our culture, that goes across the world, so that we can address really complex issues.
Yeah, I definitely see how this can actually even change the culture in the workplace. And, many times people, quit. People think they quit the organizations, where they're quitting because of their managers and all of that. So embracing humility as a leader can really turn things around in the organization, and can make people stick with the organization longer, because it even builds more trust, and it makes them know that they're human as you are, and they're even more willing to, stick with you and grow your organization. So this is great. You
couldn't be more right. Yeah, you couldn't be more right.
This is great. So I know you keep talking about your book, and I want to ask, what's the title of the book?
Oh, I love that. It's called the H factor. And I talk about humility as being a mindset for individuals and organizations, and then give, the why humility and who needs humility. And then talk a lot about in the second half of the book, how do you start to develop proper perspective of yourself, proper perspective of others, and a proper perspective of that bigger picture.
That's great. Congratulations on that book. I know, I wrote my first book, but so I know how hard it is to write a book, but yours is like 300 pages and backed by research and all of that. I can't wait to get a copy of the book. And so when is the book? Is it right now available on Amazon, or where can we find it?
It is coming out at the end of next week. So I'm so excited. It's going to be up on Amazon. So you can definitely get the ebook there, or you can actually get the softcover book there. If you want it even earlier, please don't hesitate to contact me. I have an Instagram. It's my name, Mathew.Sowcik. Love to talk to people who are interested in the topic there, or you can email me at Sowcik, SOWCIK @UFL.edu. Happy to get you a book, happy to engage with you on the topic of leadership. And I certainly will be sending you a book. I'll sign it. And you know that birthing a book is just the emotional process of putting your heart and soul into something. So I appreciate you acknowledging that, because I really feel like that's where I'm at right now, is I'm putting this little baby off into the world. And I hope people will just really embrace it, engage it, and then give me some feedback. Humbly, I ask for some feedback on it, because I think this is a topic that is understudied, and it would really help our world, certainly help our communities, and would help our families so much to just be able to engage with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we have our podcast show notes. So if you don't mind, I would like to put maybe a link to your website where people can see when the book comes out, so they can click on it and order it. If you don't mind, providing that information.
No, I would love that. And once again, I would encourage everyone who is interested in it, reach out to me. I am absolutely so excited to talk about this, and certainly talk about your organization and how you might be able to use humility kind of in that collective humility way to impact it in a positive way.
Absolutely. It's a book that I know that once people get hold of it, that's how we change our world, with things like that. So it's a really impactful book. So thank you. I know I would like to continue chatting with you, but we've come to the end of the podcast. So we always wrap up the podcast with a signature question. So it depends who's on the show, right? So if the guest is maybe a consultant, I'll ask them the question, what does empowerment mean to you as a consultant? But in this case, I would like to ask you then, what does empowerment mean to you as a leadership expert and a professor?
Yeah, I think that's why I do my job, is the idea of empowerment and passion and connecting people to what they're supposed to be doing. It certainly grounds everything and every reason why I wrote the book. It's the idea that as leaders and just as individuals, our collective goal is growth and opportunity, and within that opportunity is to empower other people for growth and their opportunity. And a lot of people call this servant leadership. Some people will engage with that kind of heart or compassion or servant leadership. I really find it to be a humility base of engagement, where we are really on this planet to grow for opportunities within ourselves and other people. So that's what engagement means to me. And I think if we do that really well, we see all of the outcomes, and whether those outcomes are success, whether those outcomes are money, whether those outcomes are happiness, all of that comes from empowering ourselves and empowering other people. So gosh, I love that question. Thank you for asking it.
Wow, this is powerful. That's it. Thank you so much for wrapping us up. I would like to wish you the best of luck, in your professional life, as a professor and as an author. I know you also write so many articles in journals. So I'll definitely be on the lookout to grab a copy or two to learn even more from you. And I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show. To our listeners out there, thank you so much for tuning in to this wonderful episode. I believe you've learned a lot. I have, and I know that once we get the copy of that book, it's going to be even more fun. So be safe, be well, and I will see you all in the next episode. Thank you. Over. Bye-bye.